The desolate moon hung against the backdrop of a massive gas giant, its surface a graveyard of forgotten ships and discarded machinery. This was where Kalen made his living, sifting through the dangerous ruins for parts valuable enough to trade. The toxic atmosphere required his heavy-duty environmental suit, but after years in this line of work, the claustrophobic sensation had become familiar. Kalen's ship, the Rust Bucket, was aptly named, a patchwork vessel of salvaged components that somehow still flew. Much like its owner, it had seen better days, but refused to surrender to obsolescence. Atmospheric toxicity at 30% above baseline, Captain, announced Cog, the ship's AI. Its voice echoed through Kalen's helmet comm. Noted, Kalen replied curtly, continuing his methodical scan of the scrap field. Any unusual energy signatures? Negative, Captain, though interference from the nearby wreckage is substantial. Kalen grunted in acknowledgement. Years in the Galactic Defense Force had taught him to trust his instincts over technology. Those same instincts had saved him when his own squadron commander had sold their position to enemy forces. Kalen had survived, barely, but the betrayal had left deeper scars than the plasma burns on his right side. The scanner in his hand pulsed with a weak reading. Something electronic, still drawing power after who knows how long. Intriguing. Kalen moved carefully through the debris, his magnetic boots keeping him anchored to the moon's minimal gravity. Cog, are you picking this up? Faint power signature, Sector 4, Grid 9. Affirmative, Captain. Reading suggests a self-contained power cell, possibly a survival system. Pushing aside the twisted remains of what might have once been a cargo hauler, Kalen discovered the source, a stasis pod, partially buried under debris. The design was sleek, unlike the utilitarian human tech he was familiar with. The pod's exterior showed damage, scorch marks consistent with weapons fire. I'm guessing this didn't crash. It was shot down, he muttered, brushing away the lunar dust from a small viewport. Inside, barely visible through the frosted glass, was a face. Not human, but humanoid. The being's skin had a faint luminescent quality, even in stasis. Kalen hesitated. Salvage was one thing. Rescue missions were another. Complicated, often dangerous, and rarely profitable. Yet something about the vulnerable figure inside the pod stirred something he'd long thought dead. Compassion, perhaps. Or maybe just the stubborn refusal to leave someone to the fate he'd nearly suffered himself. Cog, prepare medbay. I'm bringing in a survivor. The stasis pod was heavy, but manageable in the low gravity. Kalen secured it to his utility sled and began the trek back to the Rust Bucket. His mind raced with questions. Who was this being? What species? How long had they been in stasis? And most importantly, who had wanted them dead? Back aboard his ship, Kalen connected the pod to the Rust Bucket's power systems and initiated the revival sequence. Cog's sensors monitored the occupant's vital signs as the pod hummed to life. Life signs stabilizing, Captain. The occupant appears to be female, adolescent by comparative physiology. Species markers suggest Sylvan origin. Sylvan, Kalen frowned. The forest-dwelling species was known for their peaceful nature and artistic culture. They're from the Arcturus sector. What would one be doing out here? The pod's seal hissed as it released, and the cover slowly lifted. The young Sylvan's eyes fluttered open, large, almond-shaped, with irises that shifted between shades of violet. Her skin emitted a soft blue-green phosphorescence that pulsed with her quickening heartbeat. For a moment, she stared at Kalen in confusion. Then recognition, not of him, but of her situation, dawned in her eyes. Terror replaced confusion. She scrambled backward in the pod, pressing herself against its far end. A stream of melodic but incomprehensible words poured from her lips. Cog, translation. Working, Captain. Language appears to be High Sylvan. Partial translation possible. She is asking if you are with them or one of them. Context suggests previous attackers. Kalen raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. Not going to hurt you, he said slowly. You're safe. The girl's luminescence flared brighter in what Kalen guessed was fear or alarm. She spoke again, her voice trembling. She's asking about her family, Cog translated. Her ship, Her people. Kalen shook his head. Found you alone. Just your pod. He gestured around the medical bay. My ship now. You're safe, he repeated. The girl's glow dimmed slightly. Tears welled in her eyes, but her posture remained defensive. She was scared but not broken. That was something, at least. My name, Kalen, he said, pointing to himself. Then he gestured to her. After a long moment of silence, she spoke a single word. Lyra. All right, Lyra, Kalen said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Let's get you checked out, fed, and then we'll figure out what to do with you. The girl watched his every move with wary eyes as Cog ran a medical scan. She was malnourished from the extended stasis, but otherwise unharmed. When Kalen offered her a nutrient pack, she sniffed it suspiciously before hunger overcame caution. As she ate, Kalen considered his options. The responsible thing would be to take her to the nearest outpost, hand her over to authorities who could contact her people. But outposts meant questions, paperwork, possibly even investigations into why he had been salvaging on a restricted moon. And if whoever had attacked her ship was still looking for her. Cog, plot a course to the outer rim. We'll lie low for a while. Destination, Captain? Kalen sighed, looking at the alien girl who was now his responsibility. Anywhere but here. The first weeks aboard the Rust Bucket established a cautious routine. Lyra remained wary, keeping her distance from Kalen whenever possible in the confined space of the small salvage vessel. She slept in the ship's tiny secondary cabin, doors securely locked from her side despite Kalen's assurances that she wasn't a prisoner. Communication improved gradually. Cog's translation algorithms adapted to Lyra's dialect, and she proved a quick study of Galactic Common. Each day, her vocabulary expanded, though she spoke little of her past or what had happened to her ship. Kalen maintained his distance, partly out of respect for her obvious trauma, partly to reinforce the temporary nature of their arrangement. He was no guardian, just a reluctant rescuer marking time until a better solution presented itself. Kalen. Lyra's voice interrupted his thoughts one cycle as he was performing maintenance on the ship's filtration system. Her pronunciation of his name still carried a musical lilt from her native tongue. Need something? He asked without looking up from his work. This? Not right. She pointed to a section of the air recycler he hadn't gotten to yet. Filter backward. Kalen frowned, examining the component. She was right. He'd installed the particle filter in reverse during his last maintenance cycle. The ship's efficiency must have dropped by at least 15%, and he hadn't even noticed. Good eye, he admitted, correcting the error. You know ships? Lyra nodded hesitantly. My father taught me. He was... She searched for the word in common. Engineer. It was the first personal detail she'd volunteered. Kalen didn't press, but he filed the information away. Want to help? Could use an extra pair of hands. The offer surprised both of them. But after a moment's hesitation, Lyra nodded, kneeling beside him as he continued the maintenance routine. Her fingers were nimble and precise, her understanding of the systems intuitive. By the end of the cycle, they'd increased the Rust Bucket's efficiency by nearly 20%. After that, a new pattern emerged. Kalen found tasks that could benefit from Lyra's assistance. She proved adept with the ship's systems, often identifying improvements that had never occurred to him. Gradually, he started teaching her more: navigation basics, communication protocols, emergency procedures. Need to know this, he explained gruffly when she questioned why he was showing her how to operate the escape pod. Ship's dangerous. Space is worse. Should be prepared. The unspoken reality hung between them. If something happened to him, she would need to survive on her own. Nights were hardest for Lyra. Kalen would sometimes wake to hear her crying out in her sleep. Fragments of Sylvan that Cog translated as pleas for help, calls for her parents, descriptions of fire and destruction. On those nights, Kalen would instruct Cog to play soothing sounds from the Sylvan homeworld through the ship's speakers. He never mentioned these episodes in the morning, and neither did she. As months passed, Lyra's command of Common grew stronger. Her nightmares became less frequent. She began to inhabit the ship as if it were home rather than a temporary sanctuary, adding small touches that transformed the utilitarian space. Intricate knots made from spare wire that resembled sylvan art, patterns drawn on the walls with luminescent algae she'd cultivated from the ship's hydroponics bay. One night, as they shared a meal of synthesized protein enhanced with the few fresh vegetables from the hydroponic system, Lyra finally spoke of what had happened. "We were diplomats," she said quietly. "My family, traveling to negotiate trade between our colony and the Tauran Confederacy." Her luminescence dimmed with the painful memory. "Our ship was attacked. No warning. They boarded, took others prisoner. My father put me in the escape pod. Last thing I remember." Kalen nodded, unsure what comfort he could offer. "Pirates, maybe, or slavers. Some species fetch high prices in certain markets. Sylvans are valued for our bioluminescence," Lyra said bitterly. "Our light can be harvested, used for luxury goods. Does not kill us, but painful, degrading." Kalen's jaw tightened. He'd seen such luxury goods in the markets of wealthier worlds, had never considered their source. "Won't let that happen to you," he said simply. It wasn't a declaration of guardianship, just a statement of fact. Lyra's glow brightened slightly, the sylvan equivalent of a sad smile. "Thank you, Kalen." 2 standard years passed this way. The rust bucket moved between remote salvage sites and small trading outposts where Kalen could exchange their finds without attracting attention. He took no jobs that seemed risky, avoided heavily populated areas, and kept their profile low. Lyra continued to grow, both physically and in capability. Her adolescent frame lengthened, gained definition. Her technical skills surpassed Kalen's in many areas, especially with the ship's more sophisticated systems. She developed a friendly rapport with Cog, expanding the AI's programming to better understand Sylvan cultural references. At Kalen's insistence, she learned self-defense, hand-to-hand combat techniques adapted from his military training. Her Sylvan physiology gave her advantages in speed and flexibility, though she lacked his raw strength. What began as awkward training sessions evolved into fluid sparring matches that both found unexpectedly satisfying. "Good," Kalen nodded after she successfully countered one of his attacks. "But watch your left guard, still dropping it when you strike." Lyra corrected her stance, the competitive gleam in her eye a far cry from the terrified girl he'd found in the stasis pod. She moved with newfound confidence, not just in these practice sessions, but in all aspects of ship life. "Again," she insisted, raising her hands in a ready position. Kalen allowed himself a rare half-smile. The kid had spirit. Their routine was disrupted when a distress call came through while passing a desolate asteroid belt. Standard protocol among salvagers was to ignore such calls. They were often traps set by pirates. But this one came on military frequencies Kalen recognized from his service days. "Trap," Lyra stated confidently from her position at the scanner console. "Probably," Kalen agreed. "But if it's not," they exchanged a look of understanding. Both knew what it meant to be abandoned to die. Without further discussion, Lyra plotted an intercept course while Kalen prepared the ship's modest defensive systems. The source of a distress call was a small research vessel, powerless and drifting. Scans showed minimal life support and 3 life forms aboard. No signs of obvious damage or forced entry. "Stay on the rust bucket," Kalen ordered as he suited up for boarding. "Any sign of trouble, you take the ship and go. That's not negotiable." Lyra frowned, but nodded her agreement. She had learned when it was pointless to argue with him. The research vessel's airlock accepted Kalen's emergency override codes, another signal that this was likely legitimate. Inside, he found 3 scientists, 2 human, 1 Meridian, suffering from oxygen deprivation after their life support systems had malfunctioned. "Salvager," one of the humans asked weakly as Kalen helped them to their feet. "Something like that," he replied. "Ship's lost, but we've got room for you." Back aboard the rust bucket, Lyra efficiently helped the scientists into emergency thermal wraps and administered oxygen, while Kalen plotted a course to the nearest outpost. "Your daughter is skilled," the Meridian scientist observed to Kalen. "A credit to your teaching." Kalen froze momentarily. "She's not." He began, then stopped. What was Lyra to him exactly? Ward? Crew? Family? He settled for a non-committal grunt that the scientists seemed to take as confirmation. From the medical station, Lyra glanced up, her cheeks flushing a deeper shade of blue-green. She quickly returned her attention to adjusting the oxygen flow, but not before Kalen caught the expression on her face, a mixture of embarrassment and something else he couldn't quite identify. The scientists were dropped at Outpost Gamma 9 without incident, their grateful thanks accompanied by a generous credit transfer that would keep the rust bucket fueled for months. But the encounter left a strange tension aboard the ship, an unspoken shift neither Kalen nor Lyra seemed willing to address. In the cycles that followed, Kalen found himself increasingly aware of Lyra in ways that disturbed him. She was no longer the frightened child he'd rescued. At what would be the equivalent of 19 standard years for a human, she had matured into a capable young woman. Her movements carried a natural grace. Her laughter, once so rare, now filled the ship's corridors more frequently. When she worked alongside him, he found himself distracted by the proximity, by the scent of the herbal soap she crafted from hydroponics byproducts, by the melodic quality of her voice. These observations troubled him deeply. He had been her rescuer, her teacher, her protector. Any other feelings were inappropriate, a betrayal of that trust. He responded by creating distance, taking more solo excursions in the ship's shuttle, assigning separate tasks that minimized their interaction. Lyra noticed the change. How could she not, in such confined quarters? But when she questioned him, Kalen deflected with excuses about efficiency and expanding their salvage range. "Did I do something wrong?" she finally asked directly, confronting him in the ship's tiny galley after a week of strained silence. "No," Kalen answered, keeping his focus on the maintenance log he was reviewing. "Just busy." "You are avoiding me," Lyra stated, her luminescence pulsing with emotion. "What?" Kalen sighed, finally meeting her gaze. "You're young. Been through a lot. Don't need complications." "What complications?" she pressed, taking a step closer. "We are crew, yes? Partners now." "It's not that simple," he said, rising from his seat and moving toward the exit. Lyra stepped into his path. "Explain then." "I'm not child anymore, Kalen. Don't treat me like one." The truth was, that was precisely the problem. She wasn't a child anymore, and his awareness of that fact was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. "Need to check the forward stabilizers," he muttered, sidestepping her and escaping to the engine room. Lyra didn't follow, but the confrontation left him more unsettled than before. He buried himself in unnecessary maintenance tasks, tried to exhaust his body enough that his mind would stop racing. It didn't work. Late in the sleep cycle, Cod's alert tone drew Kalen from restless slumber. "Captain, sensors have detected a vessel entering our proximity. Configuration matches known profiles of Tauran military crafts." Kalen was instantly alert. "Tauran? Out here." He pulled up the sensor readings on his cabin display. "Show me." The approaching vessel was indeed Tauran, a mid-sized patrol ship typically used for border enforcement. Its presence in this remote sector was unusual, to say the least. "They are hailing us, Captain," Cog reported. "Stall them," Kalen ordered, quickly pulling on his clothes. "Tell them we're having communication difficulties. Wake Lyra." By the time Kalen reached the bridge, Lyra was already there, her expression tense as she studied the sensor readings. "Taurans were allies with my colony," she said quietly. "But rumors existed. Some faction within their military sympathized with slave traders, provided information on shipping routes, looked the other way during raids." "Think they're looking for you specifically?" Kalen asked, taking the pilot's seat and initializing the engines. "After 3 years? Unlikely." Lyra shook her head. "But Sylvans are still valuable. If they discover what I am." "Not going to happen," Kalen replied grimly. "Cog, prepare for emergency jump." "Lyra, reroute all non-essential power to shields and engines." "Captain," Cog interrupted, "the Tauran vessel is powering weapons systems." "So much for diplomacy," Kalen muttered. "Hold on." He executed a sharp evasive maneuver just as the Tauran ship fired, the energy beam grazing the rust bucket's shields. The aging salvage vessel shuddered under the impact. Shields at 63%, Lyra reported, her fingers flying over the controls. Jump drive charging. 30 seconds to ready. We don't have 30 seconds, Kalen replied, throwing the ship into another evasive pattern. Reroute life support if you have to. Another blast hit them, this one more direct. The ship lurched violently, and warning lights flooded the control panels. Hull breach in Cargo Bay 3, COG announced. Emergency bulkheads engaged. Shields at 29%. Jump drive at 80%, Lyra called out. Need 15 more seconds. Kalen pushed the engines beyond their safe parameters, trying to put an asteroid between them and their pursuer. The Gambit bought them precious seconds as the towering ship adjusted its course. They're hailing again, COG reported. Put it through, Kalen ordered, hoping to stall further. The view screen activated, showing a towering officer with the insignia of a commander. Salvage vessel, power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. We have reason to believe you are harboring a fugitive. No fugitives here, Commander, Kalen replied evenly. Just a salvager and his apprentice. Whatever you're looking for. Our scans detect sylvan life signs, the commander interrupted coldly. The specimen is the property of the Collectors Guild. Surrender it, or we will disable your vessel and take it by force. Beside him, Kalen felt Lyra stiffen. Property. Specimen. It. The dehumanizing language confirmed everything she had feared. Jump drive. Ready. Lyra whispered urgently. Kalen cut the communication link. Do it. The rust bucket shuddered as the jump drive engaged, tearing a temporary hole in space. They plunged through, leaving the Tauran vessel behind. But as the jump completed, the ship's overtaxed systems began to fail. Alarms blared throughout the vessel. Critical damage to propulsion system, COG reported. Power fluctuations across all decks. Recommend immediate shutdown of non-essential systems. Where are we? Kalen demanded, fighting the controls as the ship tumbled. Unknown sector, Lyra replied, studying the navigation system. Jump coordinates were corrupted by damage. We're lost. Kalen swore under his breath. COG, full damage assessment. Lyra, find us somewhere to set down for repairs. The next hours were a desperate struggle to keep the rust bucket from falling apart completely. They managed to limp to a small, uninhabited moon with a breathable atmosphere, a minor miracle in itself. The landing was rough, damaging the ship further, but they were alive. Outside, the landscape was bleak, rocky terrain under a perpetually overcast sky. But it would provide temporary shelter while they assessed their situation. Power cells critically damaged, Lyra reported after their initial survey. Life support can run on auxiliaries for maybe 3 days. Communications array destroyed in the attack. And the jump drive? She shook her head. Beyond repair with what we have on board. Kalen ran a hand through his cropped hair, considering their options. Sublight engines? Reparable, but we need replacement parts for the ignition assembly. Which we don't have, Kalen concluded grimly. We could cannibalize the shuttle, Lyra suggested. Adapt its ignition system. That might work, Kalen nodded. But it would be a one-way trip. No shuttle means no short-range exploration, no backup escape. They fell silent, the gravity of their situation sinking in. Stranded on an unknown moon, with limited supplies and a damaged ship. And somewhere out there, people hunting Lyra. I'm sorry, she said quietly. This is because of me. You should have left me in that pod. Don't. Kalen cut her off sharply. Made my choice. No regrets. Their eyes met across the dim emergency lighting of the bridge. In that moment, the pretense of distance Kalen had been maintaining crumbled. They were in this together, had been from the moment he'd pulled her stasis pod from the wreckage 3 years ago. We'll start repairs at first light, he said, his voice softening slightly. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be long. The repairs proved more challenging than anticipated. The moon's atmosphere, while breathable, contained corrosive elements that forced them to work in shifts, limiting exposure. And without proper tools, Adapting the shuttle's components required improvisation and multiple failures before they made progress. On the third day, as Lyra was attempting to recalibrate the salvaged ignition assembly, a power surge sent a shock through the system. She was thrown backward, her body convulsing as the electricity coursed through her. Kalen, working nearby, reached her in seconds. Her luminescence had gone dim, a dangerous sign for a Sylvan. Without thinking, he began emergency resuscitation, desperately trying to restart her natural systems. "Come on," he muttered, performing chest compressions. "Don't do this." "Not now." After an agonizing minute, Lyra gasped, her glow flickering back to life. Her eyes fluttered open, finding Kalen's face hovering above hers, his expression raw with fear and relief. "You scared me," he admitted, helping her to a sitting position. "Sorry," she whispered. "Wasn't paying attention." "No more work today," he insisted. "Need to make sure you're stable." Back inside the ship, Kalen ran the medical scanner over her repeatedly, his concern evident in the tension of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "I'm fine," Lyra assured him. "Sylvans recover quickly from electrical shock. It's an evolutionary adaptation." "Should have been more careful," Kalen muttered, more to himself than to her. "Should have checked the couplings myself." "It wasn't your fault." She reached out, placing her hand on his arm. The touch was simple, but it sent an unexpected current between them that had nothing to do with the earlier accident. Kalen pulled away, his emotional walls slamming back into place. "Need to check the atmospheric seals," he said gruffly, retreating to the ship's lower deck. Alone in the engine room, he pressed his palms against the cool metal bulkhead, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The moment he'd seen Lyra injured, something had broken open inside him, a flood of emotions he'd been denying for too long. The thought of losing her had been unbearable, and not in the way one dreads losing a friend or a crewmate. "Captain," Cog's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sensors detecting. Approaching vessel. Configuration unknown." "Torrens?" Kalen asked, immediately heading for the bridge. "Negative. Design appears custom. Possibly a private craft." When Kalen reached the bridge, Lyra was already reviewing the sensor data. "Too small for a military vessel," she noted, "but well-armed for a civilian craft." "Pirates," Kalen suggested. "Or bounty hunters? Either way, we're sitting targets like this." Kalen checked their weapons systems. The defensive array was online, but at minimal power. Their handheld weapons were limited to his old service blaster and a handful of stun grenades. "If they found us, others will too," Lyra said, voicing what they both knew. "We need to get the rust bucket operational." "Or we need to disappear," Kalen countered. "Make them think we're not here." They powered down all non-essential systems, including Cog's central processors, leaving only passive sensors running. Then they took position in the rocky outcropping above where they'd landed, watching as the unknown ship descended through the cloud cover. It was a hunter's vessel, sleek, built for speed and pursuit rather than comfort. As it landed a kilometer from the rust bucket, Kalen studied it through his field glasses. No markings, he observed. "Professional." "After me?" Lyra asked quietly. "Or after salvage," Kalen replied, though they both knew better. The Torrens must have put out a bounty after their escape. From the hunter's ship emerged three figures in environmental suits. They moved with disciplined precision toward the rust bucket. "They'll search the ship, find it abandoned, then start scanning the surrounding area," Kalen explained in a whisper. "We need to circle around, get to their vessel while they're occupied." "And then what?" Lyra asked. "Take their ship. Only chance we've got." The plan was desperate, but they had few alternatives. They moved silently through the rocky terrain, using the outcropping as cover. Years of working together had given them an unspoken communication that served them well now, each anticipating the other's movements. They reached the hunter's ship just as its owners were entering the rust bucket. Kalen attempted to bypass the airlock security, but the system was more sophisticated than he'd anticipated. "Can't crack it," he admitted after several failed attempts. "Let me try." Lyra knelt beside him, her nimble fingers working the control panel. Her sylvan bioluminescence dimmed to its lowest level as she concentrated, using her natural abilities to sense the electromagnetic pulses within the system. There, she whispered as the airlock hissed open. But I triggered a silent alert. They'll know. They rushed inside, Kalen heading straight for the bridge while Lyra secured the airlock. The ship's systems were unfamiliar but logical enough for a veteran pilot. Within minutes, Kalen had basic control, though not access to the weapons or communication systems. They're coming back, Lyra reported from the viewport. Running. Hold on. Kalen engaged the engines, lifting the ship before the hunters could reach it. Weapons fire bounced off the hull as they ascended, the hunters' fury evident in the barrage. But as they broke atmosphere, the ship's security protocols activated. Screens flashed with warning messages as autopilot engaged, setting a preset course. It's returning to its home base, Lyra realized, studying the navigation display. We can't override it. Perfect, Kalen replied grimly, delivering us right to whoever sent them. They worked frantically to bypass the security measures, but the system was designed specifically to prevent hijacking. The best they managed was to access the ship's logs, confirming their fears. The hunters had been contracted by a representative of the Collectors Guild, the same organization the Tauran commander had mentioned. So, I'm the target, Lyra said quietly. They've been looking for me all this time. Looking for any Sylvan, Kalen corrected. You were just convenient. He continued working at the controls, refusing to accept defeat. There has to be a way to break this autopilot. There isn't, Lyra replied, her voice strangely calm. But that doesn't mean we're trapped. She moved to the weapons locker the hunters had left unsecured, retrieving a pulse rifle and checking its charge. What are you thinking? Kalen asked, immediately wary of her resolved expression. This ship will dock at a Collectors Guild facility. Once there, I can surrender myself, create a distraction. That would give you a chance to escape, find help. Absolutely not. Kalen's voice was steel. Not happening. It's logical, Lyra argued. One of us might survive this way. The alternatives. I said no. Kalen cut her off, crossing the small bridge to stand before her. We go together or not at all. I'm not leaving you to those monsters. Why? She challenged, emotion finally breaking through her calm. Facade. Why risk your life? You've done enough, Kalen. More than anyone would expect. You rescued me, protected me for years. You don't owe me anything more. This isn't about owing, he growled, frustration and fear making his voice harsh. It's about, he stopped, unable to articulate the tangle of emotions driving him. About what? Lyra pressed, stepping closer, her luminescence brightening with intensity. Tell me. After all this time, just tell me the truth. The ship shuddered as it entered hyperdrive, the stars outside the viewport stretching into streaks of light. They had minutes, perhaps, before reaching their destination. I can't lose you, Kalen admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. Won't lose you. Not to them. Not to anyone. Why? Lyra repeated, softer now, her eyes searching his. Because the confession caught in his throat, years of self-discipline warring with the truth he could no longer deny. Because you matter to me, more than you should, more than I've let myself admit. Lyra's luminescence pulsed with emotion, casting shifting patterns of light across the bridge. I've been waiting for you to see me, she whispered. Not as the child you rescued, as who I am now, who I've become with you. I see you, Kalen replied, his voice rough with emotion. Been trying not to. Try to keep distance. Professional. Appropriate. Failed miserably. A small, tremulous smile curved Lyra's lips. I'm glad you failed. The gulf between them vanished as she stepped forward, pressing her palm against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Kalen's hand rose to cover hers, the touch sending warmth through both of them. Bad timing, he said, with a hint of his old sardonic humor. About to face life or death situation. Perfect timing, Lyra countered. No more pretending. Whatever happens next, we face it honestly. Together. Their eyes held, a universe of unspoken feeling passing between them. Then, With the ship hurtling toward an uncertain destination and danger waiting at journey's end, Kalen lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. Tentative, questioning. Lyra answered by rising on her toes, deepening the kiss. Her luminescence flared brilliantly, filling the bridge with pulsing light that matched the rhythm of their hearts. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Kalen rested his forehead against hers. Together, he agreed, but we're not surrendering. Not to anyone. The moment of connection gave way to renewed determination. If they couldn't override the autopilot, perhaps they could prepare a different kind of welcome for their unwitting hosts. Working swiftly, they scavenged what they could from the ship: weapons, emergency supplies, data chips from the ship's computer. Lyra's technical skills allowed them to access portions of the guild's network through the ship's secured channel, gathering critical intelligence about the facility where they would dock. Mostly automated, she reported, studying the schematics. Minimal personnel, they rely on security systems instead of guards. Systems can be hacked, Kalen noted, especially from the inside. They formulated a plan, risky, with a slim chance of success, but better than passive surrender. When the ship dropped out of hyperdrive, they were positioned in the cargo hold, hidden among the storage containers. Remember, Kalen said as warning lights indicated their approach to the docking station. These people hunt sentient beings for profit. Show no mercy. Lyra nodded grimly, checking her stolen weapon one final time. For what they did to my family, I won't hesitate. The ship shuddered as docking clamps engaged. Through the small viewport in the cargo hold, they could see the sterile, efficient processing facility, a nightmarish factory designed to receive, catalog, and process specimens for the luxury market. Now, Kalen whispered as the cargo bay door began to open. Their surprise attack caught the automated systems off guard. Kalen's military training combined with Lyra's natural abilities made them a formidable team. They fought their way through service corridors, disabling security systems as they went, their destination the control center Lyra had identified from the schematics. Along the way, they encountered what they had hoped for: holding cells containing other captives awaiting processing. Most were Sylvans in various states of health, but there were other species too, all prized for some biological feature that could be exploited. Get them out, Kalen ordered, covering the corridor while Lyra worked the cell controls. More chaos works in our favor. The freed captives needed little encouragement to join their cause. A makeshift army formed behind them, desperation lending courage to even the most traumatized prisoners. When they reached the control center, Lyra's technical expertise proved invaluable. She quickly gained access to the facility's systems, triggering alarms in distant sections to draw away security forces, while simultaneously disabling communication arrays to prevent calls for reinforcement. Found something, she called to Kalen, who was organizing the freed captives into defensive positions. Looks like a ship registry. Extensive database of captive transports, including... Her voice broke. Including the attack on my family's vessel. Kalen moved to her side, watching as she pulled up the records. Names, he observed. The ones responsible. High-level Tauran military officials. Guild executives. Dates, locations, profits. Lyra's luminescence pulsed with righteous anger. Everything needed to expose them. Download it, Kalen said immediately. That's worth more than our escape. That information could end all this. While Lyra extracted the damning data, Kalen located the docking bay where confiscated vessels were stored. Among them was a Sylvan diplomatic ship, not Lyra's family's original vessel, but similar enough to be recognizable. Can you fly it? He asked when Lyra joined him, the precious data secured. Yes, she replied without hesitation. These ships were my home. They fought their way to the docking bay, the freed captives splintering off in different directions toward other vessels. The facility had finally organized a response, but the confusion of multiple escapes stretched their forces thin. The Sylvan ship responded to Lyra's touch, systems lighting up as she connected with the semi-organic controls. Kalen manned the defensive array, holding off the security forces long enough for them to break free of the docking clamps and escape the facility. Where to? Lyra asked once they were safely away, plotting a course through unfamiliar stars. Kalen considered their options. With the data they now possessed, they had leverage, but also a target on their backs. They needed powerful allies who could use the information effectively. The Galactic Council, he decided. This evidence needs to go public, through official channels. The Council can't ignore systematic slavery once it's exposed. Lyra nodded her agreement, setting the course. As the ship accelerated toward the nearest jump point, a strange calm settled over them both. The quiet after a storm, or perhaps the eye of a hurricane. "We might not survive this," Kalen said honestly. "The Guild, the corrupt Tauran officials, they'll have resources, influence. Will try to silence us." "I know," Lyra replied, her expression serene despite the danger. "But it's worth the risk. For my family. For all the others." She reached across the space between their seats, taking his hand. The simple gesture conveyed everything they had admitted in that desperate moment aboard the hunter's ship: connection, trust, and something deeper neither had fully named yet. "Not how I imagined this going," Kalen admitted with a wry smile. "When I found you in that pod, didn't plan on any of this." "Life rarely follows plans," Lyra replied, her luminescence creating gentle patterns across their joined hands. "Especially the good parts." The journey to the Galactic Council would take weeks, even with the Sylvan ship's advanced propulsion. They used the time to organize their evidence, prepare their testimony, and recover from the physical and emotional toll of their escape. They also allowed themselves to explore the changed dimension of their relationship, navigating the transition from guardian and ward to equal partners with cautious joy. The age difference and their different species presented challenges, but after all they had faced together, such obstacles seemed minor by comparison. "Does it bother you?" Lyra asked one night as they sat together in the ship's observation dome, watching the stars stream past. "That I'm Sylvan? That we're so different?" Kalen considered the question seriously. "Bothered me more that I was your protector. Felt wrong to want more. But different species." He shook his head. "In this galaxy, what does different even mean? We're compatible where it matters. Values, trust, respect, and affection," Lyra added softly. Kalen's expression softened in a way that once would have seemed impossible on his weathered face. "And that," he agreed, drawing her closer to his side. The first test of their new partnership came when they stopped for necessary supplies at a remote station on the fringe of Council space. They had barely docked when Kalen spotted the telltale signs of guild informants. Too much interest from station security, comm channels experiencing technical difficulties, surveillance drones positioned near their ship. "They know we're coming," Kalen told Lyra as they retreated to the ship. "Someone warned them." "The evidence is too important to risk," Lyra said decisively. "We need to split up. Different routes to the Council." Kalen's instinct was to reject the plan immediately to keep Lyra close, where he could protect her. But he recognized the tactical wisdom in her suggestion, and more importantly, he respected her right to make her own choices. "Two targets are harder to hit than one," he agreed reluctantly. "You take the ship. I'll find alternate transport." "I have a better idea," Lyra countered. "Neither of us takes this ship. It's too recognizable now. We both find separate transport, separate routes. And we don't carry the actual data. We transmit it along secure channels to multiple destinations." Kalen nodded, impressed by her strategic thinking. "Creating redundancy. Smart. If one of us is caught, the information still gets through," Lyra finished, "and the other can continue the mission." The plan required trust, absolute trust, and the willingness to separate despite their newfound closeness. It was the right decision, but as they prepared to part ways, Kalen felt a weight in his chest he hadn't experienced since his military days, when leaving comrades behind in hostile territory. Except Lyra wasn't just a comrade. She was so much more. 3 weeks, he told her, memorizing the coordinates for their rendezvous point near the Council headquarters. "If either of us doesn't make it, we'll make it," Lyra said firmly, her luminescence steady and bright with confidence. "Both of us." Their farewell was brief but intense, a kiss that carried promises neither needed to voice aloud, a final touch that lingered even as they turned away from each other. Kalen secured passage on a mining freighter, posing as a security consultant. Lyra took a more circuitous route, using her Sylvan diplomat training to join a cultural exchange delegation. Both transmitted portions of their evidence to trusted allies Kalen had cultivated during his military service, people who owed him favors and had reason to distrust the established powers. The journey was tense, each day bringing new concerns about pursuit or betrayal. But when the appointed time came, Kalen arrived at the rendezvous point to find Lyra already waiting, her luminescence flaring with joy at the sight of him. "Told you we'd make it," she said as they embraced, her voice thick with emotion. "Never doubted you," Kalen replied, holding her close, allowing himself to fully experience the relief of their reunion. The final approach to the council headquarters was fraught with diplomatic obstacles. The guild had powerful allies among the council representatives, and initial attempts to present their evidence were blocked by bureaucratic barriers. "They're stalling," Lyra observed after their third failed attempt to secure an audience. "Hoping to find us before we can testify." "Then we changed tactics," Kalen decided. "Stop playing by their rules." Instead of continuing to navigate proper channels, they used Kalen's military connections to arrange a direct meeting with the council's security commissioner, bypassing the administrative gatekeepers. The commissioner, a Centaurian with a reputation for incorruptibility, was initially skeptical but agreed to review their evidence in private. "If this is genuine," the commissioner said after examining the data, her multiple eyes blinking rapidly in the Centaurian expression of shock, "it implicates at least 3 council members in direct violation of the anti-slavery Concordat." "It's genuine," Kalen assured her. "Worth our lives to bring it here." "Worth many lives," Lyra added quietly, "including my family's." The commissioner's decision was swift and decisive. She called an emergency closed session of the council's ethics committee, presenting the evidence with Kalen and Lyra as protected witnesses. The aftermath was both more and less than they had hoped for. The implicated council members were removed and arrested. The Collectors Guild was officially disbanded, its assets seized. The Tauran military faced internal purges as the extent of corruption was revealed. But justice was imperfect. Some of the guilty escaped punishment through political connections or by fleeing to non-council territories. The victims received acknowledgement but limited restitution. And Lyra's family, like so many others, remained lost, their fate confirmed by records showing they had not survived processing. In the months that followed, Kalen and Lyra found themselves unexpectedly celebrated as whistleblowers and reformers. They were offered diplomatic positions, security consultancies, speaking engagements, opportunities neither had ever imagined when they first met on that toxic moon years earlier. "What do we do now?" Lyra asked as they stood on the observation deck of Council Station, watching the endless flow of ships arriving from across the galaxy. "We completed our mission, found justice, or as much as we could. What's next for us?" Kalen looked at the woman beside him, no longer the frightened girl from the stasis pod, not just a partner in their dangerous mission, but the person who had somehow become the center of his once solitary existence. "Could take one of these offers," he suggested. "Security work, good pay, stability. Would that make you happy?" Lyra asked, knowing him well enough to hear the lack of enthusiasm in his voice. Kalen considered the question seriously. "Been fighting or running most of my life. Don't know if I remember how to stay in one place." "Then let's not," Lyra said simply. "The galaxy is vast. There are others like me out there, survivors, refugees, people who need help finding their way home or making new homes. We could do that. Search and rescue," Kalen mused, the idea immediately resonating. "But not military, independent. With the right ship, the right team." Lyra's luminescence brightened with excitement. "We know the routes the slavers used. We know where to look for people who've been abandoned, forgotten." The plan took shape between them, building on their complementary skills and shared experiences. With their newfound reputation, securing funding was surprisingly easy. Within months, They had acquired a proper vessel, larger than the rust bucket, better equipped, but modified with the same practical touches Kalen preferred and the organic interfaces Lyra had mastered. They named it Second Chance. Their first mission took them back to the toxic moon where they had met, a symbolic choice, returning to retrieve the abandoned rust bucket and any salvageable parts. Standing amid the wreckage of his old ship, Kalen felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and relief. "Never thought I'd say this," he admitted, "but I think I'm ready to stop salvaging the past and start building something new." Lyra took his hand, her luminescence creating patterns that danced across both their skin. "We already have," she said softly. As they prepared to depart, Kalen paused at the rust bucket's damaged airlock, the threshold where he had first carried an unconscious Sylvan girl to safety, never imagining how completely that impulsive act of compassion would transform his life. "Ready to go home?" Lyra asked from behind him. Kalen turned to face her, this extraordinary woman from the stars who had somehow become his partner, his purpose, his heart. "Already there," he replied simply. Together, they walked up the ramp of their new ship, leaving behind the wreckage that had brought them together, but carrying forward the bond it had created. A bond forged in the unlikeliest circumstances between a jaded salvager and an alien refugee, transformed by time and trust and courage into something neither could have imagined. A love that defied expectation, transcended differences, and promised a future neither had dared to hope for in the vast, dangerous, beautiful cosmos they now faced together.